In an earlier video, we looked at some of the options to import or export and also browse through the file system and using the batch browser and some other tools to interact with files, to load them, to save them, and so on. There's a couple of more options I'll let you explore. The batch process, for instance, we'll probably cover that soon. But I want to cover also something else, which is a couple of other places where you can actually send your images to your file system, save it to a file, or where you can load an image that's already on a file back into Dogwaffle. And that's not through the file menu necessarily. Alright, so there's a couple of other places. And so for instance, let's have a look at the image. Right, let's say if I created an image, in fact I'm going to use another filter here to render something like plasma noise. Right, and I'll go and use the RGB mode, or let's say the HSV, hue saturation value, and dabble with these parameters a little bit. Alright, let's say I want to use, let's give it one more. There you go. And I'm going to, let's make it black and white. Let's go to grayscale under the image menu and choose average. There you go. No, maybe not quite that much. Let's give it an interactive undo. We've used that before to give it a little bit of color still. There you go. Alright, so let's say this is an image I'd like to not only keep stored, as we saw earlier, we can store it to have a safe copy here. It's not really totally safe, though. It's not saved on a file. It's not saved into the file system, right? It's not written to a file. It's just saved in memory. But one thing you can do from that is you can go here and do an emergency save. And we call it emergency because sometimes, let's say if you close the program, but this thing here hasn't been saved yet, it may still be out there, and you can actually then go and save it before you close it as well. Alright, so this is one place where you can use to go and save this image. And then at that point you have a couple of file formats again that you can choose. Actually no, this one, the emergency saves just BMP, but you really don't need anything else. I mean, you can always convert it from that back to JPEG and PNG or TIFF and whatnot. Alright, so that's one place where you can send the image back into your file system, right? Another place is in the same menu here on the file. You can, instead of storing it, you can send it to the clipboard. So keep that in mind too if you want to quickly grab a snapshot of this and save it into the clipboard so that you can then take it over to another application. That's a very convenient way to do it. Alright, so for instance, if I launch one of my favorite image viewers here called Irfan View, which is a free for home use. It's a great image viewer, has lots of little really powerful capabilities. What I'll do is I'll go and take this image that I have in Dogwaffle and send it to the clipboard. Right, copy to clipboard. There's a shortcut, Control-C for that, of course. And you can also do a couple of other things. I'll let you install that's especially on pasting. But let's go copy that to the clipboard, and then I'll bring my Irfan view forward here. And of course, I got a German version running here. Practice my German a little bit. You could go and paste it in here somewhere. And that would be einfügen, Control V typically, or streng V, to insert it, right? And so that way you have the image in your other application, and that could be GIMP, that could be any of the high-end tools that allow you to copy images through the clipboard. And so it shows you don't necessarily have to save it to a file just to keep working with it, right? However, this does not save the alpha channel. Right, so this will not transfer when you have a selection mask in there. That information will not be sent over to through the clipboard, and so of course you will need to save it to a file if you want the alpha channel to be saved as well. Like for instance, if you have particle brushes or maybe the new foliage brushes, and you enable shading and especially the alpha, and let's say you use a preset for, I don't know, a branch or something like that. You draw something like this, let it rest for a second, and then you have the magic ants showing on the selection. Actually, I didn't use it there. Create alpha. Let's redo that. Shift A. There you go. So now we have a selection mask on that, and we can pick it up with the custom brush. right? And we can show a preview, PRV here, that will give you the preview of the brush if we are in paint mode, and disable the particle brushes. We need to make sure we're no longer in particle mode. So back to regular brush mode. Now we have this brush, and this custom brush, we can give it full opacity. Let's go full opacity. There you go. Alright, so we can stamp it down in different other places. And that's also an image that you might want to save. So how do we do that? Well, there's another place, right? Other than storing this image into a placeholder that we saw earlier and saving that, sometimes you have something in your brush, and this program is very brush centric, so a lot of times you have stuff in your brush that you want to save. And one way to do it, of course, is to stamp it down here and then save that image. But a faster way, a more elegant way, is to actually go to the brush menu and save it. So right here you have another save capability. From the brush menu you can go and save that, and here you will have multiple choices. You can have the default Targa format, which does include the option for 32-bit, therefore with the alpha channel, with the selection mask that we have in the brush, the BMP bitmap, JPEG, PNG, a couple of other formats. And those are typically, again, using the file conversion through ImageMagick. Alright, so that's one place where you can also save, and then there are a few more. Let's see, we got the brush store manage. That's another option, similar to image store. Storing the image, we can do a store and manage the brush image, and you can see here that it's got the plaid pattern behind it, so it's transparent on the outside of that bush or that branch that I drew. Alright, so now from this area we don't save, but there are a couple of other things you can also save. Let me show you something here. If I create a custom brush, in fact I'll create something new here. Let's go create, let's disable this preview. I'll go and create, oh I don't know, let's do a little red, draw something like very simple, something like this. Let's draw it, let's make it bigger. Let's make it something like this size. Okay, and I want to rotate that. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll pick it up as a custom brush, something like so. Right, and I'll look at my stored version, stored copy of that, and there it is. Now it's a little bit squeezed here because it fits it into a square thumbnail, but it still has that original shape, of course. And if I preview it here, I can see where it goes, and I can paint with that. Now what I'd like to do is have that thing rotated. So one thing I'll do is I'll add it to itself. Let's have a look at the film strip before that. The film strip shows I have just one image in my brush. This is an animated brush very soon. Right now it's a single custom brush, but I want to turn it into an animated brush. And then I want to save that, and so that's what I'm about to show you here, is that you can go, let's say I add this same frame to itself. I add the custom brush that I currently have here. This custom brush that you see moving around here, I'll add it to this stored image. Add another frame, add another frame, add another one, and another one. So I'm basically building sort of a collection of identical images here until I have about 15 or so, 12, a good dozen. And I say, okay, enough of this. I'm going to now go to the brush, animated brush, and there is an animated brush set of tools. And now, of course, all of these images are exactly the same orientation, and what I'd like to do is really see that there is an evolution, maybe change a rotation or change color or something else, blur rate and so on. So there's an animated brush timeline at the bottom. It's just off, a little bit clipping it off from the capture menu here. So let's just go there and see what it does. You can see the whole sequence. It's actually only a preview. It doesn't show all and every one of these frames, but you have them here, every single frame in that sequence of this animated brush. And what I'd like to do is adjust the color, for instance, and then perhaps also adjust the rotation angle. So first of all, let's adjust the color. So initially I'll say there's no red, so it's gonna be well, you know, let's add a little bit of green and blue, or actually let's do that by color add rather than color adjustment, so we don't multiply. That way we can actually really add some green and stuff like that. Alright, so if I start from the current color, keyframe it here, and then go to the end, same color, keyframe it there, but somewhere in between I can change it by reducing the red, increasing the green, and then here decreasing the green, increasing the blue, and perhaps add a little bit red again. Right, so now we have some colors that will change over time. I can have it in a spline curve, or I can have it straight line interpolation. Let's go render that. So the sequence now is undergoing some color transformations. Let's keep that. Right, so I'm going to keep the render, and then we have that here as a source. And I want to do some more transforms so that it's now also going to go and not only change color but also rotate. So let's scroll down here until we see the transform group. This is blur. Let's go to sharpen, convolve, noise, transform. There it is. So I'll grab the transform tool, and I'll say initially no transformation. Add a keyframe there, and at the very end I wanted no transformation there either. But somewhere in between, I'll let's say around here, I'll scale it up and I'll rotate it, let's say by 45 degrees or something like that. Alright, so it's going to gradually turn around. Let's render that, and you see now how it's changing angle here. It's also getting bigger. Let's keep that. Let's keep this render. But most importantly, actually, let's use this, either the source or the destination. We can use either one of those now. Just use this as a brush. So I can minimize or close this. And I now have a brush that's doing this rotation gig. Right? It's rotating and it's changing color. That's a new custom animator brush. And let's say I want to store that on the brush, store and manage, just like before. And we can see here, if we look at the film strip, sure enough, we do have a sequence where this image is rotating. And as we scroll down, we see all of these frames. So that's a image sequence that's a little bit more sophisticated. And one thing you'd like to do in cases like these is to save that out. Right, this one here, not so much. This is just a single image that we just replicated a few times. But this one here, we perhaps spent quite a bit of time in creating this, and we'd like to now save that. So when you have an animated brush, how do you save that out? Well, let's go to the brush menu and look for animated brush. We saw earlier that you can also save just the single image, right? Single custom brush image you can save. You can also store it, as we saw, and you can store it as an image. So that you could also possibly use to then say, hey, let's go and save this one image. But that's just one image. The emergency save will just save this one. And we really want the whole sequence. We know we have an animated brush here. That's an entire animated sequence. So this could be like a walk sequence from your popular 3D character animation tool. Or it could be some other 3D effects, or it could be an animated sequence of, I don't know, particle brushes that are showing some explosion or something like that. So whatever it is, whatever this animated brush contains, you may want to save that out so that you can later load it back in or use it somewhere else. This is what we'll do. We'll go to the brush and we'll say animated brush. And here you can go and save it. Right, so you can save it as an animated brush. It's a sort of its own internal format. The file ends in .anb, ANB as in animated brush, and then that way you can later use it again. Now that's one way to save it. There is another place, and that is to save the sequence. Just like you can also load the sequence of images into a brush directly, you can save the sequence. Right, and so that's of course a really interesting way, because you can there save it as a JPEG sequence or PNG. You could of course do these conversions later off. The most important thing is to have a way to actually save it out as an image sequence. Targa, default Targa will keep the alpha channel, so if you have transparency in that brush sequence, it will save it on each frame as well. And so that's one of the options there to save it. Let's see if there's any other. We got save sequence. And that's that. Alright, now there is one more place where we can save stuff to files, and that is not so much in the selection mask. I mean, here if you have a selection mask, you can store it just like you can store an image or a brush. But one thing you can do also is to go to the animation, and in animations, if you have the Howler edition, you can save the animation in a couple of ways. One is to save it in an internal format called the dog waffle animation. So that's a file ending in DWA, .dwa, dog waffle animation, and that's a very quick memory dump. And so there is, it doesn't do much compression. It's fairly big in file size, but it's very fast, and it's extremely fast also to load it back in. And then the other way to save it is save AVI. You can save it as a AVI file. And of course there you'll have choices for formats, what codec to use for compression and so on, and what frame rate to play it back at. There's also save sequence, and that's ultimately the last one I think I have here. With this you can save again the image sequence that you have in your animation. Now we haven't seen yet how to create an animation, but of course you start that right here. Right, so right here you would create an animation, and you could say how many frames you want in that animation, and go, and you have a copy initially of your current image. Right, so this animation, let's say for instance I want this image in there and I want that animated throughout, I don't know, 30 frames. Let's go create something like 30 frames, and we have now something that's going to replace the current animation, but it's not really animated yet, but it's just a copy of each frame. Right, but let's say I'm using the timeline tool here to do some sort of a, I don't know, a zoom transform. I'm zooming into this. Let's go to my transforms. There you go, and zoom. At the beginning I'm gonna have this zoom level, and then towards the end I want to be fully zoomed in, or maybe even before that I want to be at this level here. I want to scale in like this much, and I want to also move it a little bit to the upper right. Let's see, where's the edge, something like that. Right? In fact, let's do that at the very end. There you go. Keyframe it. So now I have a transition for the positions. I can make it again straight line, or I can have a nice easing in and easing out. Apply that. So now I have a little animation I just created, and let's go review this animation. Let's play it. There you go. It's only a second long. You know, playing at actually it's a little bit longer because I'm playing it at 24 frames a second. Let's go 30 frames a second. There you go. That's exactly 1 second. If I slow it down, 10 frames a second. And of course here's where you might want to use perhaps some animated filters, like what's the motion prediction module, to create something a little bit more sophisticated. Let me disable this preview on the brush. There you go. So I'm going to do a quick dry run and see how that animates. If I make it go a little bit slower, that's good. So I'm gonna go perhaps 5 tweens and run that. So with that we can create, let's say we have an animation and we're doing a quick zoom or some sort of a pan into that, and here's our little animation, and we'd like to save that. Alright, so this animation I'm going to save as a animated an AVI. Alright, so you can save it here as an AVI, and I'm going to say here's the last chance to say at what frame rate it's going to play, 30 frames a second, and then you can save it. Alright, and when you save it, what you need to do is indicate a file name. I'm going to call it, I don't know, myavi.avi. Let's use the default. And now here's the last dialog. This one here is going to ask for the compression, what type of codec you want to use, and you might use XVID if you have that. Lagarif is a lossless codec, highly recommended if you want to keep working with images or frames that are not getting lossy every time you reopen it. A really good codec to use. It's a free codec, and I use it all the time. There's also of course the uncompressed one, full frames uncompressed. So let's say I'm gonna go with XVID. You might have something similar there too. Save it, and once that's saved you want to double check it. You want to make sure it's really playing back just fine. So click on show, and that will open it in your default media player, like Windows Media Player. And if you notice anything wrong, then you'll want to check that before you ditch this animation. You want to make sure if you need to save it again. Sometimes it's not saved right because you have dimensions on that image that are not compatible with the codec. If you save it to an AVI file, the codec has usually some restrictions: minimum size, minimum height. Must be a it must be an even number for the width and the height, or must be even a multiple of 4, multiple of 8, multiple of 16, and something like that. Some codecs are very restricted to what dimensions you can use for the image. They're really made and optimized for very special cases. So make sure you know your codecs. There is also one more format you can save to, and that's to save a sequence. right? So image sequence. And so this one here, let's say I'm going to save this. Let's create a folder here, new folder, test1. There we go. Right, and let's make it a little bit smaller here, medium or large icons. And I'm going to save it, so you have, as an image sequence, you can save it, oh, I don't know, like PNG, JPEG, something like that. And when you do that, give it just the base file name, right? Base name 1, and then perhaps, you know, whatever. And then it will add a frame count behind that. So in fact, sometimes I just use like frame, right? And it will add frame 0001, 0002, 003, 004, and so on. In the case of JPEG, it also asks you for the quality, the compression you want. So if you want files to be smaller, make it a little bit lower, but it's going to be lesser quality. Right? Okay, that. So it saves each of these frames out to a file, and you get basically a frame sequence that way. So that's something you can use in many other 3D programs and other imaging applications as well. Alright, and that basically completes it for the quick walkthrough on different ways to save images or image sequences, animations, how to save those out of Dog Waffle, get them back into your file system so you can use them in other programs.